My name is Lila Matthews, and I was 29 years old when I realized that in my family, my presence was always optional, my contributions invisible until they suited someone else. That realization hit me like a punch the day of my sister's baby shower, a day I thought would be light-hearted, celebratory, maybe even bonding. I was wrong. I arrived at the venue, a small event hall adorned with blush pink and mint green decorations, the scent of fresh flowers mingling with the faint, artificial perfume of the room. I had spent weeks helping my sister plan this shower. I coordinated the invitations, picked out the favors, and even suggested a few catering options. I had baked the cookies myself, decorated them, and tied them with satin ribbons. I did all this quietly, without fanfare, because I loved my sister, or at least I thought I did. The seating chart had been one of the first things I worked on. I had envisioned it carefully. My parents at the main table, my sister in the center, myself beside her, immediate family together so the room would feel warm, intimate, and structured. We had laughed over it late at night, moving little squares on the digital layout, discussing who should sit where. I trusted the plan. I had earned that trust. So, when the event coordinator approached me and handed me a small, cream-colored card, my stomach dropped. Her voice was low, almost apologetic. "Table 7, she whispered. I blinked. Table 7? My mind tried to recalibrate. That was far. Near the hallway, right beside the bathroom. Not metaphorically, not emotionally, literally. I stared at the card, tracing the letters with my fingertip. Additional guest. It was printed neatly, no frills, no warmth, no indication that anyone expected me there except as a placeholder. My heart sank. I looked up, scanning the room. The main table sparkled under the soft glow of overhead lights. My sister sat at the center like royalty, laughing and opening gifts, her husband leaning close to whisper something in her ear. Around her, my parents and her friends beamed, glasses raised, a perfect semicircle of celebration. And there I was, shoved into a corner where the harsh fluorescent light met the faint chemical smell of the bathroom cleaner. I walked slowly toward my table, the sound of my heels clicking against the polished floor echoing in a hallway that smelled faintly of bleach. The chair was thin, with a satin cover that barely disguised the metal frame beneath. From this angle I could see everyone, hear the laughter, smell the faint scent of vanilla from the cake. But I was separate. Excluded. My chest tightened. Memories of years past slid in uninvited, unbidden, pressing against me. When my younger sister graduated from college, my parents couldn't attend, citing travel and work. I had walked alone to the ceremony, smiling for photos while the empty seats whispered that my accomplishments didn't matter. When she needed help moving into her first apartment, I lent her my car, my boxes, and my patience. When she had her first miscarriage, I was the one who drove 3 hours late at night to hold her while she cried. And yet, on this day, my contributions, my presence, my effort, my care, meant nothing. I glanced at the bathroom door behind me. Every few minutes, it swung open, releasing a cloud of floral spray that burned my throat and made me swallow hard. I kept my gaze forward, toward the main table, where my sister's friends laughed, and my parents smiled, perfectly poised, perfectly unaware. And Daniel, my sister's husband, was seated where I was supposed to be, the place I had painstakingly chosen for myself, the seat meant for immediate family. I pressed my hands to my knees, trying to steady myself. I thought of the gifts I had baked, the money I had quietly spent on deposits, the hours I had spent coordinating, ensuring that this day would be perfect. I hadn't done it for recognition, but I hadn't expected humiliation either. And yet, here I was, invisible, labeled additional guest, a footnote in a celebration that should have included me. I remember thinking, this isn't about the chair. This is about everything that's always been about me, everything I've given, everything I've done, and yet, still never belonged. As the toasts began, I sat quietly, listening to the clinking of glasses, the soft hum of laughter, the words of congratulations that weren't meant for me. My stomach twisted. I realized that no one, not my sister, not my parents, not even the coordinator, saw me as someone worthy of being in the main circle. I was background, auxiliary, a utility rather than a person. Something inside me snapped, quietly, like a thread pulled too tight. I took a deep breath, my hands steadying on the table. I wasn't going to yell or cause a scene or beg for acknowledgement. But I knew in that moment that I had a choice. Continue to sit here, shrinking, invisible, or stand for myself, finally. And so I made that choice. I tried to focus on the decorations. The pastel balloons swayed gently near the ceiling, the artificial greenery hung along the walls like a muted forest, and the cake, a three-tiered confection of blush and white, sparkled in the soft lights. Everything was perfect. Too perfect, almost, like a postcard meant to hide the truth behind the smiles. I sat in my corner, quietly, feeling smaller with each laugh and each toast that floated over from the main table. I kept catching glimpses of my sister, radiant and oblivious, her hands brushing over her belly as she laughed at a joke I couldn't hear. Daniel's hand rested casually on her shoulder. He looked happy, proud, comfortable, exactly where I had imagined myself sitting. Instead, I was wedged between the kitchen hallway and the bathroom door, the faint hum of a hand dryer occasionally punctuating the soft music. I tried to ignore it, tried to focus on the table's centerpiece, the tiny bottles of lotion and candy neatly arranged, the cookies I had spent hours decorating, sitting untouched in the favor bags. I thought back to the moment I had first offered to help with the shower. I had been excited. I loved planning parties, and I had envisioned this one as something special, not just for my sister, but for us, the sisters, the family. I had called her every other day, suggesting ideas, sending links, printing mock invitations. Each suggestion had been met with casual approval, no objection, no hint that I would be relegated to the margins when the day arrived. I had assumed that being helpful meant being appreciated. I had assumed that love meant recognition. Apparently, I had been wrong. Every now and then, I caught my mother's eye. She smiled, a polite, thin smile, and raised her glass slightly in acknowledgement. But it wasn't really for me, I realized. It was a smile she reserved for appearances, for decorum, for keeping up the illusion that everything in our family was orderly and fair. My father laughed at a toast, barely glancing in my direction. Aunt Teresa, who had always had a soft spot for me, leaned in to take a photo of the main table. I wasn't in it. I wasn't even considered. And then there was the check. I had tucked it beneath the cake table before the guests arrived. $6,000. Not for applause, not for acknowledgement, just a cushion, a little help to give my sister a smoother start. I had thought it would be private, quiet, invisible if necessary. I had done it because I believed in generosity, because I wanted to contribute without creating tension. But now, seeing Daniel seated where I should have been, my sister's laughter filling the room, the check unseen, forgotten, it felt like salt in a wound. I looked down at my hands. My nails, freshly painted, glinted under the soft lights. My fingers fidgeted with the satin chair cover. Every so often, the bathroom door swung open, sending another puff of floral spray toward me, a reminder of just how misplaced I was. I felt the familiar tightening in my chest, the mixture of hurt, frustration, and quiet fury that I had learned to suppress for years. I realized painfully that this wasn't just a one-time oversight. This was a pattern of being useful, but never seen, of being generous, but never appreciated, of being present, but never included. I thought about the times I had covered for my sister, driving her to appointments she forgot, paying bills she couldn't manage, staying up nights while she cried on my shoulder. I had absorbed the disappointment for everyone, smoothed over arguments, and kept quiet while she was celebrated. And now, in this small hall, surrounded by all the smiles and cheers, I felt the culmination of years of invisible labor pressing down on me. For a moment, I considered leaving the check where it was. Letting it go unnoticed, letting myself be polite, letting the day continue as though I were okay with being unseen. But something inside me whispered that this was the last time. That the moment of humiliation could either break me, or become the moment I drew a line. The toast began, and my sister lifted her glass, smiling at everyone around her. I watched as she gestured toward Daniel, praising his help and support, her words warm, inclusive, and yet pointedly excluding me. My lips pressed together. My fingers tightened around the satin edge of the chair. Every syllable from her mouth, every glance from my parents, hammered home the truth I had tried to ignore. In their eyes, I was not family. Not truly. Not unless it suited them. A wave of calm washed over me, almost shockingly so. Not anger, not panic, just clarity. I could continue to shrink, to accept the secondary role, to be the invisible sister. Or I could stand up and reclaim something that had always been mine, the right to be treated as more than just a background character in my own family's story. I stood. Slowly, deliberately. The chair squeaked beneath me, a small protest against the sudden shift. I adjusted my dress, smoothed the folds, and walked toward the cake table. The air felt heavier with each step, thick with the unspoken recognition of the distance I had traveled, from helper to invisible, from overlooked to finally taking a stand. No one noticed me at first. My sister laughed at a story Daniel whispered in her ear. My parents raised their glasses at some comment from Aunt Teresa. I slid the box carefully under the cake table, deeper than before, tucking it away where it would not be found. And then I walked out. The door closed behind me, and with it, the weight of expectation and invisibility. The hallway outside was quiet, almost surreal after the noise inside. I let my heels click softly against the floor as I moved toward the exit, each step lighter than the last. I didn't look back. And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, a tiny spark of liberation. The hall door clicked shut behind me, and the sudden silence felt almost sacred. For a few moments, I just stood there, letting the soft hum of air conditioning replace the laughter and music I had left behind. It was strange how quiet the world could feel once you stopped being the background. Once you stopped bending to fit into someone else's story. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel the sharp sting of anger I had expected. I felt free. I walked slowly to my car, the straps of my bag cutting lightly into my shoulder. Every step seemed deliberate, a small declaration. I was no longer invisible. I had placed the check where no one would find it, and I had left the shower without an explanation. I didn't yell, I didn't confront, I simply stepped out. For the first time in my life, I realized that standing up for yourself doesn't have to be dramatic, it just has to be firm. Once I was home, I collapsed into the couch, my heels discarded by the door. The quiet enveloped me, thick and unfamiliar. My phone buzzed incessantly on the counter. Calls, texts, voicemails. My mother, my father, Daniel, my sister. They came in waves, each message a variation on the same theme: concern, confusion, disappointment, and subtle blame. You embarrassed your sister. Why would you walk out? You didn't even say goodbye. My thumb hovered over the screen. I didn't answer. I didn't want to. For once, I wanted to sit in the space I had created for myself, a space without expectations, without judgment, without the need to justify my worth to anyone. I thought about the check. $6,000. My silent gesture of love and support, ignored, unnoticed, and for a moment, unappreciated. That money had been intended to help my sister, to make her life easier, to smooth out the stress of starting a family. And yet, no one had seen it, not the way I had intended. No recognition, no gratitude. Only the faint sting of erasure. As I sat there, I replayed years of my life. The countless times I had been the irresponsible one, the one who picked up the pieces while everyone else moved on. When my sister had dropped out of college, I had helped her with applications, tuition, living arrangements, everything. When her first marriage collapsed, I had been the one to pick her up at 2 a.m., to offer a bed, groceries, and a listening ear. And yet, all of those moments, all of that effort, had not earned me a permanent place at the table. Not in their eyes. The realization settled slowly, like a stone sinking to the bottom of a pond. I wasn't being punished for a mistake or a misunderstanding. I had been consistently, quietly, intentionally overlooked. My family had always valued me for what I could give, not for who I was. My presence was conditional. My worth was tied to usefulness, not love. I let myself feel that truth fully. I cried, not for the humiliation at the shower, but for the years of subtle neglect and invisible labor that had shaped my entire life. And as the tears fell, I felt something else, a strange, exhilarating clarity. If I had been living in a pattern that treated me as optional, I could choose to step out of it. I could choose myself for the first time, unapologetically. I started small. I left my phone face down on the counter, ignoring the messages piling up. I didn't open the emails, didn't check social media. I just sat with the quiet, letting it stretch and settle, letting the weight of constant obligation lift slightly from my shoulders. 4 hours, I didn't move. I didn't think about what anyone else would say, or how they would react. I only allowed myself to exist, just as I was. By evening, the calls and texts had slowed to a steady drip, a background hum I could ignore. And in that quiet, I made a promise to myself. I would not allow this pattern to continue. I would not allow myself to be invisible or expendable in my own family or in anyone else's life. My love, my time, my care, they were not infinite resources to be tapped without regard. They were mine to give, yes, but never at the cost of my own dignity. A week later, I began to notice small changes in myself. I took a long walk through the park near my apartment, feeling the crisp winter air against my skin, marveling at how light it felt to move without expectation pressing down. I started journaling again, putting words on paper not for anyone else, but for me. I reconnected with friends I had neglected, responding to texts I had ignored for years out of habit. Each small act was a declaration. I existed for myself, not merely as a utility, not merely as someone to be used and forgotten. And yet, there were moments when the past resurfaced. Photos from the shower, a text from a distant relative, the faint memory of the chair near the bathroom door. My stomach twisted, and I felt that old ache, the one that came from being sidelined, unseen. But I no longer recoiled in fear. Instead, I allowed myself to feel it fully, then release it, knowing that it no longer held power over me. I realized that the humiliation I had experienced was not an indictment of my worth. It was a mirror, reflecting the patterns I had allowed to persist for too long. And in that reflection, I found my choice. I could remain trapped in the old cycle, or I could walk away, quietly, with intention and dignity. I chose the latter. A few days later, my phone rang again. My sister. I let it ring. Twice. 3 times. Then I silenced it. I knew what she wanted, a confrontation, a lecture, maybe even guilt. She wanted me to justify why I had walked out of the baby shower, why I hadn't stayed seated like a good, compliant sister, why I hadn't bent myself into the shape she and my parents expected. But I had nothing to justify. Not to her, not to anyone. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table, the sunlight streaming through the blinds, and let the quiet envelope me. The smell of fresh coffee mingled with the faint scent of the candles I had lit earlier, a small ritual of calm. I had started to reclaim my space. I traced my fingers along the smooth surface of the table, thinking about the place card I had held in my hand, the words "additional guest," printed so coldly and so deliberately. That label had stung, yes, but more than that, it had clarified something I had long suspected. My family didn't see me as a person. They saw me as a helper, a fixer, someone who could be counted on to absorb inconvenience, disappointment, and even financial responsibility without complaint. The texts and voicemails hadn't stopped completely, but they had become predictable. My mother, attempting control through concern, "Lila, this isn't like you. Why are you making this about yourself?" My father, careful and cautious. You've always been dramatic about family matters. And Daniel, polite but distant. I didn't know about the seating. I'm sorry. Each message followed the same rhythm I had known my whole life. Accusation, expectation, and, if ignored, eventual silence. I realized I didn't have to respond. I realized, more profoundly, that I didn't owe anyone an explanation. I had spent years apologizing for simply existing, for speaking, for acting, for helping. I had worked tirelessly to keep peace, to be seen as the good daughter, the good sister, the reliable one. And for what? To be shoved beside a bathroom door on the day that should have been about joy, inclusion, and family? A knock on my door startled me. My heart jumped, and for a moment I considered ignoring it, retreating further into the safety of my apartment. But then I heard my mother's voice, calm, practiced, insistent. Lila, we need to talk about the shower. I opened the door, taking in her immaculate appearance, the tightness of her posture, the way she carried herself like a general inspecting the troops. She smiled, the kind of smile meant to disarm, but it didn't. Not this time. What exactly was that today? She asked, her voice measured. The way you left. It was humiliating for your sister. And for us. Do you understand that? I stepped aside to let her in, but I didn't sit. I stood, straight-backed, the chair behind me untouched. I understand perfectly, I said calmly. I just didn't understand why I was treated as invisible. She blinked, her expression momentarily faltering. Invisible? You're my daughter. Your family. I laughed softly, bitterly. Family isn't a label you can assign when it's convenient. Family isn't something you reserve for people who make you look good. I was there for decades, giving, supporting, sacrificing. And what I got in return was a chair by the bathroom. Her mouth tightened. It's just a seat, Lila. You're making this bigger than it is. No, I said firmly. It's bigger because it's always been bigger. This chair, that card, you're ignoring me. These aren't isolated events. They are patterns. And I've been quiet too long. She folded her arms, lips pressing together, the silent fury rising behind her eyes. You're being selfish. You're being dramatic. You're making this about yourself. I took a breath, steady, deliberate. No, I said, voice soft but unwavering. I'm being honest. I'm choosing myself for once. I'm not walking away because of a chair. I'm walking away because I am tired of being used, ignored, and expected to absorb everything without recognition. I am choosing boundaries. I am choosing dignity. And I am done apologizing for existing. The silence stretched. It was heavy, almost uncomfortable. She hadn't expected this. She had anticipated tears, excuses, pleas, but not this calm, deliberate resolve. I could see her calculating her next move, but I had already stepped out of the pattern she was used to. I'm leaving, I said. Not because I hate you. Not because I don't care. But because I need space to see myself clearly. I need to be more than just a background character in this family. She stood there, frozen for a moment. Then she said the words that confirmed everything I had suspected. You should be grateful to be included at all. Your sister didn't even want you there at first. Grateful. That was the word she chose. Grateful that I existed, grateful that I helped, grateful that I had endured years of invisibility without complaint. I realized then that this wasn't just about the shower. It had never been about the shower. It had been about control, about expectation, about using me until I had nothing left to give. I didn't respond. I handed her a copy of the check I had placed under the cake table. It was never cashed, I said. I canceled it the next morning. Her face drained of color. For the first time, I saw recognition. Not remorse, not apology, but acknowledgement that she had underestimated me. "She's going to be furious," she said, her voice tight. "I'm counting on it," I replied, quietly. And then I walked past her, out of the apartment, and into the world I had been avoiding for too long. That night, I didn't sleep perfectly. But I didn't wake with dread, either. I felt something unfamiliar. Space. A wide, empty space where I could breathe. The tension of years had begun to lift, and for the first time, I felt that small, sharp spark of liberation grow. The days after the confrontation felt strange, almost disorienting. My phone remained quiet for hours at a time. The notifications I had expected, calls, texts, guilt-laden messages, finally replaced by nothing. At first, I worried. I worried that my silence would feel like abandonment, that my absence would be met with rage or grief. But the quiet wasn't empty. It was liberating. It was space I hadn't had in decades. I started small. A long walk in the park, where the winter air bit at my cheeks and the bare branches traced shadows across the sidewalks. No one was expecting me to help, to carry, to absorb their disappointment. No one was counting on me to bend myself into the shape they wanted. I could just exist. I breathed deeply, feeling how heavy years of unspoken obligations had been, and how light life felt without them pressing down. I revisited my apartment, the little oasis I had neglected while bending toward others. I rearranged furniture, dusted off forgotten corners, and lit candles. I made my space mine again, and as I moved through it, I realized how long I had been living outside of myself, giving everything for everyone else while barely noticing who I was. I had been present, yes, but never seen, not really. I started journaling. At first, the words were hesitant, fragmented, just fragments of thought, invisible. Overlooked. Always responsible. Always last. Always behind. But soon, the sentences grew longer, steadier. I wrote about my sister, about my parents, about the shower, the chair, the check. I wrote about the way I had always been the fixer, the caregiver, the invisible daughter, and how for the first time I was choosing not to be. I began reconnecting with friends I had neglected over the years. Texts that had gone unanswered, invitations I had ignored because I felt obligated elsewhere, people I had unintentionally pushed away in the habit of always prioritizing family, they came back into my life. Each coffee, each lunch, each genuine laugh reminded me that I was more than a utility, more than a helper, more than the invisible sibling who always carried the weight of others' expectations. Work became a refuge. My colleagues noticed a difference. I was calmer, quieter in a way that wasn't shrinking. It was steady, intentional. I spoke when I wanted to, didn't speak when I didn't. I found joy in small things. A meeting that ran smoothly, a compliment given freely without obligation, a task done because it mattered to me, not because someone else depended on me. And then came the trip I had postponed for years. Italy. I had saved for it quietly, secretly, dreaming of it in moments stolen from obligation. 4 years, it had been a someday plan, something to reward myself once everyone else's needs had been met. But now, I booked the flights. I selected the hotels. I circled the dates in ink on my calendar. This time, there was no hesitation, no compromise, no expectation that I had to justify the choice. I was doing it because I deserved it. I was doing it because I was finally free to prioritize myself. Even memories of the shower, once sharp and humiliating, began to shift. I thought of the chair by the bathroom, the small cream-colored card, the check I had hidden under the cake table. I felt no anger now, only clarity. That day hadn't been about rejection alone. It had been a mirror showing me the truth I had ignored for too long. My family had never truly included me, except when it suited them. And in that revelation, I found my first real sense of power, the ability to walk away quietly, intentionally, and without apology. Messages still trickled in occasionally. Daniel sent a text a few weeks later, simple, neutral. I found the check under the cake table. I didn't tell anyone. I just wanted you to know I'm sorry. It wasn't absolution. It didn't undo the years of feeling unseen. But it mattered in its quiet acknowledgement. Someone else had seen the cruelty, and without drama, had recognized that I had been wronged. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I had already claimed my own validation. I had already started building a life where my worth wasn't determined by others' appreciation or acknowledgement. And slowly, gradually, I realized that the hardest step, the one I had been avoiding for decades, wasn't leaving the shower or confronting my mother. It was allowing myself to stay away, to trust that absence didn't equal loss, that boundaries didn't equal punishment, that choosing myself wasn't selfish. That step I took every day. I wasn't just walking out of a room anymore. I was walking into myself. Months passed. The world outside my apartment moved as it always had, oblivious to the quiet revolutions happening in my life. And yet, inside me, everything had shifted. I woke up without dread, without the familiar knot of anxiety pressing against my chest. The constant tension, the habitual bracing for disappointment, it was gone. Replaced by space, by clarity, by freedom. I took the morning slowly, savoring coffee in the sunlight, the steam curling around my fingers, the taste sharp and grounding. I walked the city streets without expectation, letting myself notice the small details I had ignored for years, the rhythm of traffic, the laughter of children passing by, the smell of bread from the corner bakery. I felt present in my own life in a way I hadn't allowed myself to feel before. The writing class became my sanctuary. I sat quietly at first, letting others speak, letting words fill the room without judgment. Then, little by little, I began to write. Stories that had been buried under years of obligation, stories I had whispered only to myself. I wrote about the baby shower, about the chair by the bathroom, about the check, about being seen and unseen, about the quiet acts of kindness that had gone unnoticed. My words weren't perfect. They didn't have to be. They were mine. One afternoon, my phone buzzed. A message from Aunt Teresa. She wanted coffee. Just the two of us. No updates disguised as concern, no questions about the gift, no judgments about my choices. When I saw her at the cafe, she smiled warmly, the kind of smile that didn't carry expectation. I should have said something that day, she said softly. I saw where you were seated. Everyone saw. And you left quietly. That took strength. Strength. The word felt foreign on my tongue at first. But I realized she was right. It had taken strength to walk out, to step away from expectations, to claim space that had always been mine. And now, for the first time, I could feel it, not as guilt, not as apology, not as justification, but as power. Back at home, I looked at the little corner of my kitchen where I had once hidden the check. I had canceled it, and yet it remained a symbol, a quiet declaration of intent. I hadn't done it for recognition, nor had I done it to prove anything. I had done it because I had the ability to give. And that alone was enough. I didn't need validation from the people who had taken my presence for granted. I didn't need my family's approval to feel complete. I thought again about the folding chair, the satin cover, the additional guest place card. Once, that small label had defined me, constrained me, reminded me of the role I was expected to play. Now, it felt like the final spark that lit a path I had been afraid to walk for decades. Walking away had not been the end. It had been the beginning. The beginning of understanding my own worth, the beginning of creating a life that prioritized me without shame or apology. Life didn't suddenly become perfect. My family didn't call more often, and my sister never apologized. My mother's voice remained sharp in memories, my father's disappointment a faint echo. But the ache I had carried for years, the constant tension of expectation, had dissolved. It was replaced by quiet observation, by reflection, by the ability to choose how I engaged with the world. 3 weeks later, I booked my flight to Italy. Not tentatively, not with hesitation, but with deliberate joy. I marked the dates on my calendar, circled the hotels, confirmed the itinerary. This wasn't a someday dream anymore. This was my life, unfolding on my terms. I imagined walking the cobbled streets of Florence, tasting gelato in the sunshine, visiting art museums I had longed to see. For the first time, I felt fully deserving of pleasure, fully deserving of attention, fully deserving of life without compromise. The calls and texts from my family came and went, predictable and empty. My sister sent a short message one afternoon. "People are talking. You really left them hanging." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Her words no longer carried power. Not over me. I spent the following months rebuilding the life I had postponed for so long. I wrote stories for myself, I traveled, I reconnected with friends who truly saw me. I allowed myself to feel joy without guilt, to say yes without obligation, to say no without fear. I learned the rhythm of my own life, the cadence of my own desires, the language of my own heart. And sometimes, in quiet moments, I thought of that baby shower. The chair by the bathroom, the faint smell of floral spray, the glittering banner overhead. I didn't feel anger anymore. I didn't feel humiliation. I felt clarity. And I felt gratitude, not for them but for myself. For the courage to walk out, for the courage to choose me, for the courage to finally understand that my worth had never been contingent on anyone else's recognition. The strange thing about cutting someone off isn't the loss. It's the silence, the absence. And in that silence, I found room to breathe, to dream, to live. I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I was free. And in that freedom, I finally believed. The moment I stopped being an extra in my own life was the moment everything began.